You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadow Dark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss running rival crawlers. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Jody, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague and sometimes player friend, but none of those things today. What's going on, Matt?
Hey, Jody. I'm excited. This is going to be a good one.
There's a lot of people in the room here for this one. You're going to do voices for them all.
You know, you'll see.
Okay, all right. So, if you didn't catch it at the intro, today's episode is going to focus on using rival crawlers, a rival adventuring party in the mix with your existing play group. They get to see their mirror selves. Who knows? There's a lot of ways you can go with this. Matt, you had this experience just this past weekend at time of recording, so take us to the table. What was going on?
All right, so in our Sunday open table game, our party of 4, we actually had a core class party. We had a priest, we had a thief, we had a wizard, and we had a fighter. All of various levels. They all descended down into a small dungeon set beneath one of the various barrow mounds that is contained within this marshy setting, in which the barrow maze itself, the mega dungeon, is also contained. But this is a smaller dungeon, just a little 5 or 6 roomer. And after discovering several secret doors in this place, they had a good amount of treasure. They've been doing quite well. They were loaded up. They set foot in a room that they discovered was slowly filling with water. And after dispatching with some animated statues and claiming this cool magic sword, they heard the sound of rival crawlers descending the stairs. The voices of these crawlers seemed intent on violence, so the party hastily, and perhaps a little too hastily, closed the door to the room they were in, essentially locking themselves in a room filling with water.
All right. So we're going to gather around the fire and break down the events that ensued, I suppose we would say. We've got our regular play group, or rotating play group, I guess as the Sundays go, of classic party of 4 in a trapped room, and just we don't have enough going on. We need to add a rival crawler party. So what led you to the point that you were like, rival crawlers, that's the thing that they need to encounter right here? How did we get to that point?
It was a random encounter. And with so many things about random encounters, which is a topic we could plumb the depths of forever. This random encounter was, first of all, it was not something I pre-rolled. Mm-hmm. So we'll get into that in a second. But this was a random encounter that I hadn't really had an opportunity to bring to the table in this kind of campaign, this open table campaign. And I'd actually been really feeling like there wasn't, that the players in these sessions had been fighting a lot of monsters. There's a lot of undead. There's a lot of, things that they had some role play encounters, but I was kind of feeling like I wanted to kind of zhuzh it up a little bit with a little bit more role play. Just by the grace of the gods themselves, I was bestowed this opportunity to run a rival crawling party of not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 rival crawlers, which, oh boy.
Yeah, so 5 rival crawlers, and you just said you didn't have this pre-planned.
Oh, no.
So generating 5 characters on the fly, shadowdarklings.net, or...
Well, okay. So, okay. So,
that in and of itself is a hurdle.
Yeah, so I didn't use Shadow Darklings. I didn't use, Shadow Dark tools. I hope I'm getting that right. We'll put links to both in the show notes. They're both amazing resources, but unfortunately, so first of all, I don't run with a a screen really, but I also don't run with any electronics.
Yeah,
so,
other than music, we are both pretty
Right.
analog. If it's in person, we're as much in person as we can be.
Yeah, and
See sand timers for torch timers.
exactly. So if I'm being honest, though, I was actually really interested in using the Rival Crawlers tables because I'd never rolled on them before. And I had never really looked at them in depth. I just kind of knew where they were in the book. And I had some sections of the book for random encounters tabbed in my Shadow Dark book. I flipped to it, and I realized that the party's kind of talking about what they want to do, and I go, now is my chance. And I just start rolling dice, just chucking dice and writing. I have a little kind of school-sized or like personal-sized little whiteboard that you would do like math problems on or like hold it up in school.
Yep. It always reminds me of like an old school chalkboard, like from a schoolhouse from like a turn of the century, like Little House on the Prairie or Sleepy Hollow if we keep it seasonal.
Dude, this is I don't.
You get a lot of mileage out of that tool.
I use it every session. It's where I take almost all of my like session notes that are names or initiatives, characters. I just want to throw this in here. This is just a little bonus. You get this for free.
Such value.
When I'm running for a group, especially a group with new characters, and I need to figure out where everyone is around the table, I will literally just draw a table diagram, and I'll just put each player character's name on the table. And then because we do individual initiative, much like a 5e style, that's how I track initiative. I'll just write the numbers next to the names. It's great. And around that, I just write a whole bunch of crap, and I have a picture and I will post it of what my
was this picture I got after
Yes.
right at the end of the evening. I was like, so how did it go? And I get a picture of this just gibberish on him.
I don't have terrible handwriting, but when I'm writing fast, much like many people, my handwriting is utterly atrocious. And I will say I have a little trepidation about putting this online, but I will do it. This is just full of random names and crap and writing. And it was actually a really important tool to have because when I needed somewhere where I could just kind of quickly scroll, and I write in wet erase markers, not dry erase markers, and that's another important point so that things don't really smudge or whatever once they set. So I have this board and I'm just cranking through rolls. I'm rolling on tables, and I honestly wasn't even really paying attention to what the heck I was rolling. I was just writing stuff down. At the end of it, I got to some of the tables about like the renown of the party and like what are they known for. And I just rolled these unbelievably, ridiculously perfect rolls that like this was a wealthy party, first of all. Second of all, that they had a pretty, I think it was, they were like widely known. And then the most critical part of this was that they had a legendary sword. I just basically decided kind of what their basic character classes would be. I numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and decided that those were the levels of the characters. So
fitting. Well, again, to highlight the point that our monthly Sunday groups, it is a wide variety of character levels. We range from 1 to 7 now.
Yeah, well, we had a level 1 thief and we had a level 7 I think 6 at the time, maybe. I could be wrong, but regardless, wide range of levels.
Yeah.
And in the actual player character party. And so I figured wide range of levels in this Rival Crawler gang. So that's the setup. I didn't complete all those roles while they were talking. I kind of went back to the tables and things. And it was nice, though, and this is kind of what I want to start with, is that when I roll random encounters, I oftentimes am rolling them at the table, and occasionally it kind of breaks the game up a little bit and slows the game down. It's kind of a bummer. But one of the things I like is that sometimes once I know what the encounter is, I can kind of set up the encounter. I can give the players a little bit of hey, you hear these voices. You hear voices of maybe 4 to 5 people. What do you all should figure out what you're going to do. And then I can kind of quickly finish rolling the encounter once I know a little bit more about it. So
I think I want to pause there because I think that's a really important point. And it's something, frankly, I've learned from being a player at your table over the years now is for a lot of GMs, I think what happens is they go, oh, random encounter, roll. I see rival crawling party. So I'm going to start rolling that up. And then the game just stops. And you've developed the skill, and I've mooched it from watching you, is that it's, okay, random encounter, roll. okay, I can tell them what's coming or telegraph it in some way. The instant I see rival crawling party, you mentioned in your intro of like you hear voices and footsteps and like ill intent. So is that kind of what you gave them and then went back to rolling?
Yeah, I established the basics of the scene. I think the other thing is that random tables are one of those points where I think every GM has got to figure out how comfortable they are. We can talk about fudging dice rolls when it comes to combat, which I don't do. But when it comes to a random table, I really don't like to fuss with the result, but I will make some inferences, or I'll make some calls or improvisational calls that will reduce the number of rolls I have to make, and I'll just do that based on the current narrative, right? I mean,
and not to be overly pedantic about this and like really hammer it, but like, so because the party was in a room and they were kind of in a confined space, you just made the executive call to go, this encounter's happening at a far distance. Like whatever this thing isn't showing up right on top of them, because it's just not going to work well. Like they
would hear it, right? They're not going to not hear a rival crawler group just like arrive at the door, right?
Right. Like, and it's the old, the saying I love to go back to. I think the first time I heard this, but it's a quote of a quote of a quote. So forgive me for not citing my OG source. Quinn's at the time, Shut Up and Sit Down board game review, said, he was quoting somebody about like when you buy a pizza, you don't buy it for the box, right? It's the function, it's the game. It's your game. Use the game. And it kind of is morphed in my head into this anytime it's about like, hey, you're in charge of the thing. Don't let the thing be in charge of you.
Sure.
In this instance of rules, my point being like, yeah, there is a table for like, man, I'm not sure how close this thing should be. Great. There's a table for that. No, common sense says I can't have a rival crawler party being like, hello, we were in the corner the whole time. You just didn't notice it. That's silly. So it's your game. Stick them down the hall.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that I did learn from just the initial part of this, because I want to get to what happened, because there's a whole other part of this where we roll initiative and things happen. So the other thing is important here is that I love coming up with characters. Like and we've talked about this in the past, but I love doing voices. I like to, like what's down here, we're gonna have to find out who's, and just kind of doing this just extemporaneous kind of gravelly party leader, who actually ended up being deeply flawed in combat. So the dice told a story. The dice betrayed his voice.
Sounds like Jason Statham, looks like not.
Well, that's sort of the vibe I was going for. Is kind of a a lock, stock, and two smoking barrels kind of a fellow. But I think I think that a part of why I love random encounters is because they surprise me. Mm-hmm. And I know that not every GM likes being surprised. And I think that there's this sense in the OSR community, and there's a sense, I think, in also the Shattered Art community, that a part of what makes, and I'm going to say this, and you can tell me whether or not you agree, like there's like a virtue to surprise and generative stuff, like that it is more virtuous to roll on a table than to have something pre-prepared. And I just like fully disagree with that. It's just, for me, I like, and one of my strong suits as a GM is extemporaneously coming up with specifically voices and characters and role play. The stuff that I'm not good at, which is creating set encounters, which I kind of struggle to not do in one very rote way. I kind of have I have a very specific style of random or non-random encounter. I like random encounters. I think that if you're a GM that doesn't like the surprise or just can't roll with it, that's fine. And you shouldn't feel bad about like pre-rolling some encounters or pre-rolling one encounter and then just deploying it whenever you need it.
Yeah, I mean, topical of topical, Ginny D just actually put out a YouTube video about this at time of recording just a few days ago, and it's really solid. And I think it was funny because her videos tend to lean new school and 5e centric. this video spoke so heavily to this OSR point of random encounters, and I think there is a level of virtue that is assigned to like, well, the random encounter table says, and again, it's GM preference. It's that, we talk on the show a lot about the one true wayism, and it's become one of those one true wayisms that this is how you should run your table. And as counterpoint to what Matt's saying is like, yeah, I don't particularly enjoy random encounter tables. It's something in the spirit of trying to stay within Shadowdark as it's presented, have adopted and worked into, but it is definitely an area of growth for me. I don't have that spontaneity and that yes and, so I like scripted encounters, and I do tend to heavily curate. If I have a random table, I pare it way down to like, no, there's like D4 things that are going to possibly happen, and so I can be prepared for those and not lead my party into liminal decision space. That is my my favorite Achilles heel to reference. But you said you wanted to move forward with this, and I think why I was harping on the initial show up is I think the notion of rival crawlers or rival parties is something people restore or reserve for like huge story arc stuff. Like, oh, well, if I'm going to go into the effort of developing this random NPC rival crawler party, man, that has to be some giant story arc, and that's the campaign. And this is an instance where somebody, Matt, as somebody who enjoys the spontaneity of things, you embrace that on the fly, which I think flies in the face of that whole notion that like, oh, this is like this kind of weird sacred cowy thing, and
sure,
like I'm reveling in dispelling that a little bit, and also like loved the point where you said of the Barrow Maze has it's a barrow, there's a lot of undead in it, adding some life to the party, in all of the possible meanings there. But you said we've got this party now with a closed door with water raising in the floor, and there's a rival party outside, and right. So take us to the next set of beats.
So the kind of long story short, because in real time, it actually took quite a while to resolve some of this stuff because the players were very interested in trying to make sure that they asked questions. I mean, this was like one of those parties that was very good about getting information, understanding what's going on, and they made some really cool and interesting and thoughtful decisions about how they were going to go about engaging with this encounter. They realized that the room was filling with water, so they took a sledgehammer and like popped the bottom of the door out, like a kind of made a crack to kind of start siphoning off a little bit of water or letting a little bit of water out. What ended up happening is eventually they ended up talking to this rival crawling group and realized that they were cornered. This rival crawler group knew that this was the case. And so there was going to be some kind of tense encounter once this door was opened. And so we were at a stalemate. And so eventually what happens is somebody pops off, they fire a magic missile through the bottom of the door, hits somebody in the foot, and things are, and it's on. So I think the other thing I wanted to really talk about was running 5 NPCs.
Yeah.
And how to do that. And I kind of want to run this by you. So without me telling you what I did, you, I think, have done something like this before in the past, if I remember correctly. You've had situations like this. In a Shadowdark game, how would you go about handling 5, I wouldn't call them fully classed NPCs, but I was considering the wizard to have wizard spells.
Yeah.
So how would you go about that?
Yeah, not too terribly long ago, you and I played in a session where you were playing and I was running, and you guys took a boat in Saltmarsh. For those who know the sinister secrets of Saltmarsh, there's a boat at the end there. And yeah, that crew, certain members of that crew had options well beyond being just a monster. They had some personality, and I knew, and again, that's that, like, I knew I was going to do this, so I had it scripted. I was like, okay, I've got some tools here beyond the usual monster set. So yeah, I dove into it and just was like, okay, tried to have for the wizard in particular, and isn't it always the wizard NPC, those casting classes? And if you're going to play it as a wizard where they have spells in their pocket, having a sense of a script of what is this wizard's approach. But again, I had that front loaded. I kind of went, okay, I know this wizard has these spells in pocket. I know this is how this guy rolls. Okay, these are the if-thens for his spell book. So I've got that. There's meat on, there was just the muscle fighter, and there was the captain. And I used, actually what I did is I defaulted back to kind of a 4E mentality where the monsters really had specific roles, where there was the controller and the leader and the brute, and then you had minions around as well because they had the meat boys of the crew, just meat shields.
Sure.
So for me, what I went with was thinking as much as I could in terms of what is that classes, if you will, because if they were rival crawlers, I would think in terms of class. What's the role? Have them do their role. Like what if it's a fighter's going to wade in and start swinging. But again, there's a notable difference if I knew that going in that okay, this is how I'm going to play this, and we'll see how the combat evolves and grows as you guys make decisions. Whereas on the fly, I would like to think I would go, okay, fighter's going to fight, thief's going to thief, wizard's going to wizard, cleric's going to priest's going to priest. That one didn't work as well, but we know what we're saying. So yeah, there's also, so I want to kick it back to you with, so what did you do? And the question, and I think it's a valid fear of rival crawlers, is doesn't this mean that the combat's going to just drag? There's a lot of info here.
Oof.
And if you have done this in a more crunchy, we'll say, system, 5e, the obvious in the room, a Pathfinder game, I can't even imagine, a 4e game. Oof. And in fact, I've had this experience as a player in a Cthulhu game, a Call of Cthulhu, where there was another investigator group, and wow. I mean, the longest, slowest combats I've ever been a part of. So there's those kind of two parts. So what was your approach to man, you got these 5 distinct NPCs now, because really if we're rival crawlers, we're at the world of NPC, not just monsters. And so how did you approach it? And then eventually did it grind things to a halt? All
right, so I have this principle when I'm running, especially when I'm running large numbers of monsters. It's the same principle, by the way, that if I'm playing a board game, especially one that actually has quite a bit of crunch, I keep this in my head. So I actually got this from a great board gaming podcast called So Very Wrong About Games, where the two hosts on that show often quip, play faster, misplays are interesting. And this doesn't really work in a board game sense when only one player is doing it, but I don't really care. I always try and take my turns quickly because when somebody does something wrong in a board game, it creates interesting spaces for new and interesting things to happen. So I have the same mentality when I play NPCs. I am fully aware after almost every combat I run that there were more strategic things I could have done. I probably could have made the counter more interesting in these ways, but my primary concern is moving through it quickly. And I don't really care about tactics or strategy insofar as the only real strategic elements that I planned were exactly what you said. The fighter is going to fight. The priest is going to do priesty things. The other thing I did was I figured in a party like this that was kind of evil in terms of the way that I interpreted their lore from the random tables I rolled on. What I sort of got from that was that the high level character would be in the back, safe for as long as possible, and they would send in their low level characters to kind of go soften everybody up. It just so happened that the wizard was a level 1 wizard, so send the level 1 wizard in there. Just hit him with sleep. It'll probably work. And that was kind of all I gave. I just gave the old college try after that. It was like, well, that's going to happen. The low level characters are going to go in. This is not a strategically high quality maneuver, but it did make for an interesting combat. And all I did was I tried to get through my turns as quickly as possible.
Did he get the spell off?
Yes.
Your monster / NPC caster successfully cast a spell.
This is never has. I
This is a whole episode for us. The number of kobold and goblin shamans I've run that just.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Well,
a digression.
The level 5 priest that had a suit of plate mail, I decided, and the magic sword failed. Natural 1 on a cleansed weapon spell just right off the bat, and I was furious. And I didn't know what to do, but then got off a mass heal later. It was awesome. So long story short, move through the turns quickly. If I needed to cast a spell, luckily, I have enough experience with Shadow Dark, and I have enough experience with players who have played characters of level 5 or higher, so I kind of understood the general statistics. So, like for a level 3 fighter, I just kind of heuristicked. Came up with a heuristic of like, I'll just give them about a +5.
Yeah.
Right? Like that seems reasonable. I think maybe a +5 or a +6, and then I gave them a +2 to damage or whatever. And I didn't really think about these things, and the players, because we were moving so quickly, and I clearly wasn't trying to be hyper strategic. The players didn't call me on anything because I was being fair and always rounding in their favor. If I needed to round anything, or I kind of needed a heuristic in my head, I kind of just always rounded down or kind of took the lower value or whatever it was. But we were moving quickly, so they were able to react in real time, and it really was a nice back and forth, I thought. And you know, I after the combat took place, everybody around the table was pretty much in agreement that it was super fun, that it moved pretty quick. It must have been 8 or 9 rounds.
Right. And the boat combat you took part in, I felt that was a huge part of it for me, was like,
huge
man,
win.
just keep moving. Not to oversell it, but that is one of the things I've come to absolutely love about Shadow Dark, is you can run really large combats and with a kind of heuristic mindset of like, okay, I know where things should be landing. You can dice roll through. I mean, on another level, I ran an encounter that was a castle siege. And because of the way the flat math works in Shadow Dark, it really does allow you to cook through some things in a way that certainly a crunchier system just doesn't.
Yeah, I just want to call attention to this post on the Shadow Dark Creators Forum on the Discord, which is actually posted by one of the moderators whose name on the Discord channel is Matt. And he posted a utility table for kind of appropriate monster stat modifiers. I will in the future have this printed out and just use as kind of a reference, because what I like about this is it's super, super, super quick. And he's come out with a couple of these. There's a couple of them floating around. I'll post any of them that I can find to the show notes, but they're really useful to have, because I think all too often we as GMs can get a little bit wrapped up in ensuring that everything is quote unquote like by the rules in combat, because combat's really important to characters, because whenever a character's life is on the line, we don't want to screw something up. We want it to feel earned if the characters prevail, and we want it to feel equally earned if a character or the characters do not prevail in whatever way that works out. So I like having some math to support my decisions, but I also have realized that just giving up a little bit of control and a little bit of even accuracy is okay in Shadow Dark, as long as you're doing it in a reasonable way, because like you said, Jody, the math is pretty flat. I wanted to ask you though, and this is coming from a place of just kind of wondering, we do initiative quite different than the Shadow Dark book suggests. Like we don't start with whoever rolls highest and then just go around the table. And we've done that for quite a long time. And hilariously, I hated individual initiative in 5th edition. It drove me bonkers. You know this. I tried to change it like numerous times.
You gave it more than the old college tried.
Yeah.
We tried on all those socks and shoes of initiative.
And thank you. And now in Shadow Dark, I don't know that I'm interested in playing in a different way, because for combats like this, I can place or roll individually, or just I'll be honest, I just use the standard DCs for the initiative values of different characters of different levels. And they just go at different intervals. And I love that. It creates a dynamism where there's actually a back and forth, and there's no chance that all the characters are going to get to go before I go. Because if there's one thing that kind of drives me bonkers, it's when characters get all of their turns before the enemies get to do anything. So I wanted to kind of get your thought about that. And I don't know if this is going to be, I don't think this is a controversial opinion. I have no problem, and I don't think that, again, no one true wayism here, but like for me, and I think for us, the individual initiative where everyone rolls a dex check and we very quickly scroll down the values and then go in descending order. That's just like, it really works for the kinds of combats that I find interesting.
You have inadvertently asked me to show the goods on something. I don't know if you know I do this or not. This might be a GM to player. I screw around with this all the time. And apparently you've either you're asking because you've noticed or you didn't know, which is either way is great.
I'm so immersed in the story, Jody. I never notice anything.
Especially the story.
Especially everything that you're saying. Yeah. I'm really involved in my character.
What's my motivation here?
oh, he's talking again.
A dragon. A dragon, you say. When did he show up? So what I do is, earlier I mentioned the pirate battle that you took part in, and there were the NPC character folk, and then there were pirate crew.
Yeah.
And they had smuggler stats or pirate stats, whichever, something like that from the monster list. If it's a minion or a mook, I don't roll initiative for them. It's their dex modifier to 10.
Yeah.
It's a flat level.
Yes.
If it is somebody of note, they get an initiative roll.
Right.
So in that battle, all of the crew went on, I think, 11. And it was, for players, you're rolling against a DC 11 to go first or second, before or after. But then the captain, the first mate, I think the bosun, and the deck wizard, they all had individualized initiative rolls, modified by their individual deck scores. So yeah, I waffle on this. And if it looks like the party is going into a room and the room is just full of goblins, I'll honestly evaluate, like, well, which is going to be more interesting here? Like, is it, this is a room of goblins to be chewed through? Flat decks. No, this is like a big kind of interesting tactically moment, and it's going to be more fun to like stagger them out. I'll stagger them out. And it's one of my levers that I'm like, it's not a fixed thing. The player characters, it's always D20 plus decks, and that sets you in order.
Sure.
The monsters, there's a little vibe check in there, and it's one or the other. Like, it is predictable. It's either, hey, this person's cool, this monster's special, it gets to roll like a character for initiative. But if they're just minions and mooks, like, they just go on a flat DC.
Yeah, and we had come up with 10 plus decks a while back as a kind of a way to just make it easier. And like I said, I've just been using the standard DCs. So if it's a low level monster, and especially if the monster was like surprised, they just go on a 9.
Yeah.
And if it's if they probably have the jump, or if they're really high level or something,
Displacer beast.
Exactly, they get to go on an 18.
Yeah.
The reason I try and use the standard DCs for as much stuff as I can.
Yeah, I think we both do. I just honestly never thought of using it for initiative. That's a good idea.
The reason I like that is there was a back and forth. And this has been discussed a lot. There's lots of different kludges for initiative in 5th edition and other role-playing games. And I'd be fascinated at some point to dive into Call of Cthulhu, because I feel like if you're doing a long slog of a combat in Call of Cthulhu, I don't know how that would work, and I don't know why that would happen. So I'm very interested to hear about it at a later date. But for me, the interesting parts of combat are different depending on the encounter.
Yeah.
And so having, a bunch of goblins go on the same exact initiative, fine. But having a bunch of goblins who have a goblin shaman, maybe that shaman goes on 15, maybe the goblin's go on 12, or maybe the goblin's go on 9 and the goblin shaman goes on 12. Then I don't have to roll anything, because I can just hear people going like, well, that's a lot of things to roll, and then you got to record stuff. And I used to have that opinion. That used to be me, man. I used to be like, then you got to interrupt the flow, and it's terrible because you got to write a bunch of crap down. But now I've got this sweet dry erase board with a wet erase pen, Jody, and let me tell you, it changed my life.
And the rest of us plebes are over here writing on paper like suckers and using up our erasers.
Well, I mean, let me tell you, I just bought a chisel and a tablet of stone. And so I think that's really what we're going to.
That's what's next. That's just next. Write past chalk and a chalkboard down to chisel.
Man, I would use chalk in a heartbeat. But we're getting a little far afield. Let's get back on track. The way that this ended was awesome. And I don't want to run through the entire combat because that would be tedious, but I just want to point out a couple of great moments. There was a charm person where the level 2 dwarven thief in this rival adventuring party got charmed and then was kind of like caught between trying to convince this wizard that just charmed him to like, no, join us, and the wizard kind of playing off that. I love charm person. I find it very charming, and it's just super fun. And I try and play it up. I know that some GMs probably get really frustrated with the way that it works at the table because players will try and take advantage of it. I don't care. Players take advantage of it all you want. If I have a chance to role play weird nonsense, I'll do it. But there was that moment, and then there was also the moment of, I mentioned this earlier, of this mass heal, which was super cool because it represented this thing that the players have only, I think it's only ever been cast successfully in my game once. And to have it done to them, watching the players see not one but two of their rivals get up off the ground, because I also gave them dying rounds. Oh, they were pissed. Yeah. And it was awesome. So those are two moments I wanted to call out. They eventually did win, meaning that they ended up, through some very creative play, figuring out a way to do away with these rival crawlers. A couple of them tried to leave because they failed wisdom checks and failed their morale. They tried to run them down, no loose ends. And now we had this situation where they had a legendary sword, they had a bunch of rival crawlers, and I had to figure out what I wanted to do for the loot. What I told the players was, these guys don't have really any coin on them because they're very wealthy. They wouldn't bring their coin with them. Who would do that? Alongside that, they did have this legendary sword, which during the combat, I didn't have enough time to look up. And then after the battle, I looked up in the back of the book. I just looked up a cool legendary sword that felt reasonable. And I ended up with the Sword of the Ancients, which you can look up in the Shadowdark Core rulebook. Realized that the battle might have been a little bit different if I had actually implemented using this sword. No one cared. Yeah. And I think that ultimately that's kind of the thing I wanted to end with, at least for my part, is the players didn't care that there were a couple of, mathematical errors. I probably added 6 to some attacks and 5 to others. I probably didn't do all of the math correctly. I might have rolled a D10 when I should have rolled a D8. Like, ultimately, that didn't matter because we were moving around the table quickly. All the calls I was making felt reasonable, and like I wasn't out to get the players, in the sense that I wasn't doing things that felt unfair. But it was tense, and it was snappy, and it was fun. And I think that ultimately that's what you can get with a rival adventuring party. I will hopefully have another one of these experiences where it's resolved via roleplay, and I can come back and we can talk about that. That would be really interesting. This one didn't end that way, but I think that's the thing that I kind of wanted to say. It's about the vibes, man. And the end of the session, it passed the refrigerator test. No one was talking about the mechanics of the game. They were talking about what happened in the combat.
So you mentioned earlier, though, that you sometimes, or you maybe disillusion's a bit strong, but the set piece encounter, right? And here you are, you're talking about just rolling with it and just having this experience. And yeah, maybe the magic sword that he had didn't get used to its fullest nth degree, but but man, it was really fun and leaning into, because you know you're on the fly and you're going to play fast and make mistakes because that's going to create interesting opportunities. And I remember you talking some years ago about those set piece encounters and having a hard time with the time you'd had to think about the set piece encounter, letting go of all those tactical things you knew to be true.
Oh, yeah.
So would you say that in celebration of the random rival crawlers table, which is very easy to say, on pages 126 and 127 in your Shadow Dark Card rulebook, that there's a freedom in that spontaneity that you now, kind of years down the road, can in reflection go, that's the thing. That's that scripted. Am I playing it tactically right in a satisfying way that this rival party, in this particular instance, is doing all of the things they can do to win because that's what they'd want to do? The spontaneity gives you that permission structure to just let that go.
Yeah, so two things. First of all, when we had that conversation, the other frustration that I had was that I never felt like I could run, and we were playing 5th edition D&D back then. I never felt like I could run encounters I couldn't put the gas pedal fully to the floor because my players weren't interested in the mechanics of the game. They were more interested in the story.
Yeah.
And I always felt like I was kind of pulled in two different directions where I wanted to challenge them, but it would literally have been unsporting to go full pedal to the floor. But also it would have been unsatisfying to just constantly throw bandits at them with, and try and make that fun. So there's a lot of stuff we could talk about in terms of other things I could have done, but that's in the past. This is more my jam because I don't have any time to think about all that stuff. I don't have to sit there for like 2 weeks thinking about this encounter and thinking about how it might play out and thinking about how all these different pieces are going to line up. I've got a minute and a half to roll on 7 tables before these knuckleheads look at me and go, what's happening? And I find that fun. Like that for me is a part of the joy. And like I said, that ain't going to be everybody's jam, and it shouldn't be, and it can't be, because there's other parts of the game that are not my jam that are other people's. That realization was really important for me. Even when it comes to a super complex encounter like this, I love just playing fast and loose, and I love the high wire feeling of you're building the plane while you're flying it. Uh-huh. That's my personal sort of joy that I get out of this.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you stuck the landing because everybody had a good laugh at the end and went, man, those guys, they were jerks. All right, let's take a break. Let's hear from our sponsors, and we'll bring some topics to light and see what we took away from this one.
Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by the Wandering Shop's next Coffer Quest crowdfunding project, The Hammer. Are you weighed down by not just your gear, but also a crippling debt from a week of carousing? Well, before you go gallivant off to some dark, forsaken place to risk your life in search of fortune and glory, might I ask if you've brought a hammer? Not heard of a hammer before? Well, the gods smile upon you today, my dear crawler. If you contribute just a few measures of gold now as an upfront investment, you could be the proud owner of a tool that will change your life in about a year's time. This crowdfunding project acquired all of the necessary finances within the first 2 minutes of placing a flyer on the local tavern's bulletin board. But the more coin they raise, the more value for you and your fellow investors. Don't miss a chance to get in on the ground floor of the most revolutionary tool since the primordial age. Plus, this is the only time where you'll be able to acquire an exclusive pin of the Wandering Shop's emblem. Spread this message far and wide, my friends. Tell everyone, and the hammer shall be a reality. CofferQuest crowdfunding is not a store, and delivery of materials is not guaranteed.
All right, folks. Let's bring this topic to the light and close out our discussion. We're going to change it up a smidge this time. And And we're going to kind of have a leading question here. Matt and I were talking about this a little bit and went, okay, let's set a framework just instead of general takeaways, because we did a pretty good sales pitch on, hey, try them out. What is it that rival crawlers bring to a game that monsters don't, Matt?
All right, so the first one isn't going to be any surprise, but they bring three-dimensionality. Not that monsters don't have to. I mean, you can have lots of three-dimensionality in monsters, but there's a certain element of being able... It's a familiar thing to interact with, these rival adventuring parties, because they have the same goals that you do often. And I like the idea that when you break up your sessions by putting an adventuring party in front of your players, a rival group of crawlers, that it's also unpredictable. And that's because of the three-dimensionality of both the individual members of that rival crawling group, but also just what happens when, the characters, the player characters, get to see some folks that are doing the same stuff that they are.
Yeah, and in that, there's an assumed complexity or realness or groundedness. In a sense, I had a very similar first point that I took away from this is the joy of the mirror, right? That the players are seeing themselves. You mentioned about the mass healing spell, the mass cure spell, that like, oh man, we know this thing is out there and here's this person wielding it. And like, I've seen that a bunch of times of, that mirror also brings a gravitas or a truth to the world, that not only are you seeing exactly as you said, Matt, of like, they're doing what we're doing, but the motivation is there then as well. And it's just assumed that motivation is real and it's grounded and it feels good. And if your players have been misbehaving and being a little naughty, if there's occasional flirts with some murder tourism or whatever, hey, having a party that says we do the same thing really is a not so gentle but great tool. So yeah, that very similar in that three-dimensionality and that mirror. There's so much truth in it that brings the world away in a unique life that a tribe of orcs just typically doesn't.
All right, Jody, I've got the next one, which is you can do funny voices, and it's just great. I was going to say that, excuse me, that this is the best party I've ever been a part of.
All right. Yeah, there's a little glimpse into being at Matt's table. I'm going to close out with this one. You can go hard. When a rival crawler group throws down some tactical complexity, they pull off some shenanigans in combat. The thief gets behind somebody and then the fighter tabletops them over them. When you're doing that with, a tribe of goblins or kobolds, it can feel a little unsporting. When a rival crawler party does it, the players won't bat an eye. They'll just hate them all the more. And there is a time as a GM not playing antagonistically, not being out to get your players. That's try to avoid that. But there is a time, we all know, that you want to play God with a little bit bigger hammer. And doggone it, rival crawlers, they get to do it, and they get to do it without apology. All right, folks, as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in our discussion that you can take into your future game. If you have any questions or a unique experience from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, head over to the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadow Dark Discord channel. Look for links to any materials we referenced in this episode in that thread or in the show notes. If you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can find Jody on the Shadow Dark Facebook page under the handle Pezman. Look for the little blue winged helmet. And you can find Matt via Discord using the handle SCMatt. Until next time, later, nerds.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by that tomfoolery mother, Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster, and Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production and is not affiliated with the Arcane Library LLC. Shadow Dark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library, copyright 2023.